Welcome to Go Behind the Ballot, a podcast where two Texas moms go on an educational quest to demystify Texas politics. Join me, Nichole Abshire, and my co-host Claire Campos O'Neill as we deep dive into the most burning issues, hear stories from candidates, and offer hope in these challenging political times. Let's saddle up and go behind the ballot.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Go Behind the Ballot. I'm Claire Campos O'Neill.
And I am Nichole Abshire.
And we are so happy you're here with us today. Today, we are going to be talking about abortion in our Culture Wars series. And this is one of those big topics that I know I was a little intimidated by, but I'm so glad that we were able to chat with Scott White and learn more about this because if anything I'm coming away with, it's that we just need to talk about abortion. And interestingly enough, Scott has an Instagram handle called Let's Talk About Abortion in TX. So we were like, oh, this is sort of right up the alley of what, this conversation is going to entail. And he's a very interesting guest, a little bit different from sort of the guest experts, quote unquote, that we have on most of the time. But he had such a great journey to share about how he educated himself on abortion that we were excited to dig into that and share it with all of y'all. So Nichole, what do you think of Scott in our conversation?
I'm so glad that we found him. I guess you found him.
I think he found us.
Oh, did he? Okay, well, great. However that happened, I think it's so amazing. And he is such a perfect example of, I think, what we hope to emulate, right? Which is this idea of getting more engaged, getting awakened to whatever political issue starts to kind of make your blood pump a little bit, and then following a learning journey path. And that is exactly what happened. And as he describes, there's sort of no reason why he would have discovered this world of abortion talk had he not attended this event. And I love that we talked to a man. I think that it's so important that we change the conversation so that it is super inclusive. I love that he is an example of someone who chose to educate himself and educate others, and that he is very honest about his journey and learning as he goes, and a willingness to have tough conversations. So fantastic.
Yeah. And I also want to make a quick note, especially touching on inclusivity. So generally for this conversation, we did use women when we were talking about pregnancy. We want to acknowledge that there are pregnant people. There's people who get pregnant who do not identify as women. And we didn't, just so you know, we generally said women, but we do know that it impacts other Texans as well. So check out this episode. We hope you learned something valuable and useful. All right. Well, we're excited to chat with Scott White today about abortion. Hi, Scott. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling a little harried. It's one of those days where it's like here, there, but it's like, okay, settle in for the conversation. Yeah. Well, this is a big topic. I feel like it's the one of the culture wars that's most like, oh my goodness, it's so loaded. But I'm glad we're still going forth and going to discuss it, because I think that's part of what makes it so intimidating is that we don't talk about it enough and normalize it and just have conversations. And that's a big reason we wanted to chat with you, because you have a really great Instagram handle called Let's Talk About Abortion in Texas. And I'm like, oh, I can't really get more perfect than that. So you felt like a great match for this conversation.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to participate in this conversation, and it's an important one, and for all of us to have with everybody. So I'm excited just to kind of share my experiences through it with the two of you, and go from there. So,
yeah, perfect. Well, we always like to start at the beginning with our guests' origin stories and find out more about where they came from and that developmental process. So tell us, are you from Texas? What was your upbringing like?
I am from Texas, fourth generation Texan, actually, and my wife's a fifth generation Texan. I was born in Lubbock, Texas, but we didn't stay there long, and then ended up in Silsbee, Texas, which is deep southeast Texas, north of Beaumont, and there all the way through high school. Really, I guess yeah, that's my kind of my early background. From there, I got out of school, went back to Lubbock, joined a company called Accenture or Anderson Consulting, and worked there for 32 years, and retired last year. So that now I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, wife and some pets, and we have 3 adult children, all of them out of the house, and 2 of them out of college, 1 in college. So I'm getting closer.
Mhm.
That's exciting. I have to throw in, I am a 6th generation Texan, and I think it is hilarious that we know these things.
I know.
That it's just a
Yes.
sort of a family unit that you talk about how many generations
Hmm.
you've lived in this state. So I feel that. And hello.
We love it. So did your family talk about politics growing up? Was it something that you remember having these kind of discussions around the dinner table, or was it more like, nah, we don't really, that's not like polite conversation, so we're just not going to touch that one?
Yeah, it was pretty. I mean, politics growing up, we didn't talk about it that much. I mean, I grew up in the probably 70s, mid 70s to mid 80s, and everybody was a Democrat. All, both sides of the family, all of Texas were Democrats back in the 70s and whatnot. I think for me anyway, in the late 70s when we had the Carter administration, the high inflation, and it basically cratered the oil and gas industry and the lumber industry in East Texas. And both my parents at that time had small businesses, and they both went bankrupt. They lost their small businesses, and they had to move out of the area. And in my mind, I blamed the Democrats and Carter at the national level. So when Reagan came along and change in monetary policy, which I learned about later in college, I was kind of like, wow, the Democrats really have no idea how to handle money, and I blamed them for that time. So I've been really a Republican in every sense of the word since the early 80s. So
Yeah, it's funny. I think it wasn't until not that long ago that I learned Texas was a Democratic state for the longest time. And then there was a switch because there's such a strong Republican stronghold now. And it's like, oh, like I think we think in this moment in time, like things have always been this way, but it's like they actually haven't. And I guess things are a little bit different now because of gerrymandering and sort of this intentional like rigging of the system. But things, we're a pendulum. We go from one direction to another in America. And sometimes it's nice to zoom back and be like, it's not how it's always been. Or this is not how it's always been.
oh no, a vivid memory I had was I had a great uncle that was friends with Mark White Jr., who was the governor. And when he passed away in the mid 80s, I vividly remember Mark White speaking at his funeral, right? So, it was weird to be a quote Republican back then. Like, what are you doing hanging out with these elitist banker types instead of the, farmers and ranchers and working class folks back in the day? So,
It's
Mm-hmm.
wild, right? I mean, that's pretty true of, I guess, most of the South, right? That it used to be Democratic. And yeah, it's only been since the 80s that things sort of flipped in terms of party control. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's move in to talk a little bit more about abortion. I'm just curious, what made you decide to educate yourself on this specific topic?
yeah, it was actually a very specific activity or event that happened for me. My professional career never said the word abortion. My private life, I never said the word abortion. I never really thought about it. Um, but my daughter got involved as a freshman down at UT with a nonprofit organization, and they put on a little event, and it was called Give an Ear. And the idea was it's a low pressure, come and learn more type of activity. And she put a lot of energy into it, her and her friends, and they did it on Republic Square right downtown Austin. And of course, I'm generally oblivious to most of this, being the dad, right? And then, of course, as parents, you got to show up. So, we showed up, my wife and I showed up. It's an all day event. We're like, oh, we get to be here all day. This is great. And, we got there, and all of a sudden, she had, and her friends had these great speakers. So they had Paxton Smith, who was kind of famous or infamous for changing her valedictorian speech to focus
Mhm.
on abortion. If you guys remember that one that
Yeah.
That's
blew up.
right.
And Vicki Goodwin showed up, who I had no idea who she was at the time, and she kind of stood up and said, "Well, this is great. Glad y'all are here. Y'all need to vote, and unless we get new leaders, we're probably going to have the same laws." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." And then another person that really influenced me that day was a lady named Kristen Herring. And Kristen, she told a story where her and her husband went through a journey of in essence, a normal pregnancy, but they got pretty late into it and they realized that the child was non-viable, right? So, and then they had a very short window of time to deal with that. And the abortion laws kind of got in the way. And Kristen almost died in the process. And so as she was going through that, I just sat there and I went, well, gosh, there's a real challenge here that people are having, and people like myself, which are, I don't know, my demographic, my age group, what I think about all the day. We just don't think about these things, and it's really painful to have these women having to just advocate by themselves against the rest of the world. And I'm like, you know what? I need to learn more about this. And I promise you, I had no idea what I was getting into. And when I started thinking about this sitting in the room, so that was my trigger. That was April of last year. So
April of 2022.
22, yeah, 8 months ago. So
look at you. Wow.
Yeah. I was curious if this was before or after SB8 had passed, and it sounds like it was after. So that's why I'm sure Christina had such a Christina.
Yes.
Kristen,
yes.
Kristen,
Yeah.
sorry, had that terrible experience because SB8 had gone into effect.
Yeah, SB8 was a part of it, but there was other parts of it where she'll tell the story that her healthcare provider told her not to do additional investigations early on because they kind of like they told her the wrong information, so it delayed her longer to find the right information. And then when they found out that the child was not viable, then they still wouldn't do anything for a long period of time unless she went through all these other procedures. And then when she finally went to have the procedure, it was in an office environment. Her husband couldn't join her. She went through a throng of people telling her really rough things. And she came out of it just really beat up, right? So she's like, I want to tell other people this story. And, because again, she's the 1% scenario, right? But the 1% scenario is a viable scenario for any of us. So.
Can I just pare it back? Your
Yeah,
story
no.
is just so interesting because so if I'm understanding what you're saying, there's not necessarily something in your background that would have predicted that you would show up to an event invited by your daughter and then just kind of get this fire lit and go on this learning journey.
Well, yeah, none whatsoever. I mean, it kind of stepped through it, right? So it's not like you never thought I would know what I know now. When I found out Kristen's story, I'm like, hey, no one ever talks about abortion. So my next step was I went home and I called 3 of my very close friends, and and we sat around all night talking about this, and we said, hey, let's talk about abortion. We covered kind of the spectrum from one end to the other, and boy, we went into every little detail as 3 old men can probably do, I guess, as much as you can think about all the theory, non-theory. And the weird thing is, even though we crossed the spectrum, we kind of came out with, at the end of the day, what we thought was a reasonable policy that the 4 of us would put into place. And, that kind of got me excited. That says maybe I should talk about this with more people. So it just kind of was like one little step that led to another little step. And then boom, 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 boom. Next thing you know, I've, done a lot of research.
So what prompted you to invite your friends into the conversation?
Well, it was really just that point where I'd listened to that event, and then I'm like, I mean, I don't know where to take this. Let's go talk about it, right? So, and I don't know, maybe I'm just want to be provocative with my friends at points in time, and we entertain ourselves that way. So, and we've talked about a lot of different issues in the past, right? But we never really talked about abortion before. So, and then from that, because I think, and all of them went back and said, we had a great conversation. We enjoyed it. And, I ended up probably doing that many more times through the next couple of weeks. I made my parents talk about abortion with me, which they had some interesting stories, and a number of my friends talked about it with me, and they had some interesting stories. So there really was kind of a desire to have a small group conversation about this, or people wanted to have these types of conversations. So
Can you talk about I'm like, I feel like this is a model we need to take everywhere, all of us in our lives. How do you tee up those conversations?
well, you got to be having a good time doing something else.
Okay.
And like I'll give one example. We have a lake house down near LBJ, and we're all like floating in the water. And I'm saying, hey, I have a good idea at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. Let's talk about abortion. And they're like, no, no, no. But then as soon as you saying that, then boom, right into it. Everybody just starts telling their personal stories. So it's nice, right? And I've had people come to me. I was like, hey, I really appreciate you, Scott, talking about this. And it's sort of let me tell you something. And then I haven't told anybody that before. And I'm like, well, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So it also sounds like, though, your approach is not coming in with an agenda. Like, you're not looking to proselytize, for lack of a better word, to people. Like, you are actually wanting to have a conversation.
I actually want to have a conversation, and every intention I ever had with anybody on the call, no matter where they were with me or what I believe in or what they believe in, I really wanted to really understand them. And so that's been my basis for, what I've done so far. Now, I will say, as I went through the journey, I became more confident in my personal position. And, I was a bit more, I'd say, I think this is bad or this is good about certain things. But in terms of the people I interacted with, I respect everybody that I've had the honor to interact with on this topic. So,
Yeah, that is something worth modeling. Some feedback I've received recently about our show is they're like, you do have a perspective on certain things, but you don't come across as like this group of people, they're idiots for believing this or that. And it's like, well, yeah, at the end of the day, it's really the systemic thing that we're interested in, and why is it the way it is. And people come from all journeys, and we're all learning. So to be critical of someone and make them feel stupid or shameful, like, I'm not interested in that, because that just further pushes us apart instead of together, and only together can we really figure this out.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question, Nichole. How did you get people to open up? What were the reactions like? I mean, did you ever get into real hot water with some of these conversations? I mean, it seems very emotionally charged, or at least can get to that place.
It can, and there are some places where they became emotionally charged, but usually it was not with me per se. It was like two or three steps away. It's like, oh, because Scott put out these videos, it kind of made this other person 2 or 3 steps away kind of mad or upset or something like that. So there'd be kind of like residual things pinging around the background a little bit. Because again, as there's a lot of different angles of this particular topic, and it's easy for people to potentially get mad about it. But I just said it's part of the journey of this topic is to kind of make people mad. So they're gonna get mad a little bit. That's how it is. So.
Yeah, I love that you were willing to risk that. I think sometimes we can get so complacent and really value comfort over growth. And so I think that's just so great that you were like, no, let's just do the hard thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us, so you went to this event that your daughter put on, you started talking to your friends. Then how did you continue to educate yourself and form your opinion on abortion?
Yeah. So I just, I envisioned these little video things in my head as I was working through that process, and videotape, videoing the like whiteboarding session or thinking about this and the other. So that really started it. But then if you think about abortion, there's so many different like threads to it, right? The history of it, and what it is and what it isn't, and the faith-based aspects of it, and the legal-based aspects of it, and the constitutional-based aspects of it. And so I think that it was the day the Dobbs Amendment came out, I'm like, okay, you got to do this. And of course, had my daughter set me up on Instagram because I didn't know how to do Instagram or Twitter or barely Facebook. So they helped me with that part. And then, I just kind of did the first video. And then I started like interviewing a bunch of people that had different points of view, and they started sharing shaping my opinion. And then I got to the end of it, and then I started being more specific about what I believed, especially as we got closer to the election. So,
So it really sounds like you started with an open mind. It was just about learning. And then you, at some point, right? I'm sure
yeah,
all along you were aware of your own values, but that started to really inform what you really then had an opinion about.
yeah, it was about well, yeah. So I'll tell you the story that led me to the path that let me have a firm opinion. So my previous opinion was like, somewhere in the middle. I would say, okay, not okay. I kind of believe both sides, but I'm okay with the laws that we used to have in the past. But then after, one of the things I did is I came back and I called up my representative here in the area. It's a guy named Giovanni Capriglione, and I said, because I looked up and apparently he's the guy that sponsored the trigger bill, the House Bill 1280. And this is before I posted any videos. And I'm like, hey, can you talk to me about abortion? And I didn't expect him to call me back, but he did. 2 days later, we talked, and we had about a 20-minute conversation, and it was a good conversation. But what he said in there was a couple of interesting things that kind of like, what are you talking about? And because he did sponsor the bill, but he's like, do you know about the abortion pacts in Texas? I'm like, well, no, not really. He's like, well, there's two of them, and there's Texas Right to Life and Texas Alliance for Life. And they said they hate each other. They absolutely can't stand each other, which I thought was interesting. Again, I've never spoken to either people in these pacts. I can't, verify or deny either of these things. But then he told this, the Texas Right to Life pact, he told this story about how he had sort of backed away a couple of years ago from supporting everything they were pushing on him on, and they basically went out and printed cards with dead babies and his name on it and passed them around Austin. And the way he said it, I interpreted it as they basically shamed him into passing that law, putting it forward and passing it and supporting it and everything else. So then so that sort of like tuned me into the PACs. And then I did some research on the PACs, and then after researching the most conservative one, the Texas Right to Life PAC, I learned the names of the Wilkes brothers and Tim Dunn for the first time. And this is well before like I learned all the other stuff about these two individuals, but apparently they're the money behind those PACs. And then I'm like, wait a minute, only two guys are like supporting these PACs that got this guy to pass this law. So then I knew at that point, in spite of all the threads that exist for abortion, the one that mattered most for this group was the political aspect of it, right? So driving a political behavior associated with it. So even though I covered all the other areas, I eventually knew that this was the end game for the topic. So.
Okay, really interesting. I'm going to break in and just remind people who are listening in case they don't remember, but a PAC is a political action committee, and they often, or they can, maybe I should put it this way, they can take on singular issues and advocate for whatever that position might be. And often it can be unclear who is funding those political action committees. And so it can seem very grassroots. It can seem like a lot of people sort of take this position, and when you follow the money, you will sometimes discover that it isn't a grassroots organization at all, that it can be funded by a very wealthy few who are pushing a very specific agenda that may or may not align with what most people believe and would advocate for. Mm-hmm. So
that was
just
a great
reminder.
Summary, Nichole. Yes. It always is good to just make sure we're all on the same page together, especially with PAC money. And I'll also plug, if you're like, who are these billionaires? We did do an episode about following the money in Texas politics with Chris Tackett, and he really broke down how two billionaires are funding PACs in Texas, candidates in Texas, and controlling a lot of the political rhetoric. And it makes you wonder, is this really about life, so to speak, or is it about something else? Which sounds kind of like where you were stepping into, Scott.
Yeah, that's correct. So I did. I mean, when I looked, I guess early on, I looked at the Constitution, right, and say, okay, what does the Constitution say about abortion?
The
Which is
US
the U.S.
Constitution or the
Constitution,
Texas?
the
Okay.
U.S. one. Texas, I haven't looked at so much, but the U.S. one, and it's interesting. It doesn't say anything about it, right? So I presume everybody that wrote it never thought about it, right? That's my presumption. They do use the word born, right? So you have to be born, right, in the U.S. to become president. And then later on, the 14th Amendment, which was the famous one that basically confirmed that all the folks who were former slaves or citizens all had to be born or natural citizens. So it uses the word born a couple times, but it never talks about the idea of a person before they're born as being identified inside the Constitution. So I thought that was like an interesting take on it. For sure, Roe versus Wade was kind of wading into that space, but there is an argument that says, there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution about abortion rights, right? So nothing per se. So I did that for a bit, and I thought that was interesting. I looked at the kind of the biblical and faith-based portions of it as well, right? I think the Bible. And by the way, I'm saying these things, and this is my own research. So anybody's listening, this is my own research, my own point of view, and every one of my videos, I encourage you to do your own research and develop your own point of view. But this is my takeaway. But I read quite a few things, and there's a couple of areas in the Bible that could point to the abortion as not directly to abortion, but kind of indirectly of awareness of life before you're being born. But there's also parts of the Bible that says, you started when you were born. God breathed life in you, right? So it's about equal on both sides, and certainly the New Testament, which is the basis of Christianity, is completely makes no comments on it whatsoever. So anyway, for me, I didn't know these things really before really kind of studying those two threads, for example. So
Yeah. I want to jump in again and say that we are in Texas, which is, I think very easily, this is on my mind because I just did actually created a TikTok and an Instagram where I was sharing with our listeners that we had our first two Muslim representatives, sworn in the Texas House. And I think it's just so easy for us in Texas to, when we think about faith-based or we think about religion, it automatically is a thought about Christianity, so it just, kind of putting that out there for us to just keep in mind.
Yeah, that's true. I've been fortunate in my professional career, traveling and living places all around the world. So it's a lot easier to see, differences when you've been in different places, right? So especially the Texas version of Christianity is really limited to Texas, right? The other parts of the world don't really practice it the same way. So
that's a good point. Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes, I don't think I realized that until college in my Latin American studies, where I was like, oh, there's like this social justice component to some parts, some Christianity, different versions. And yeah, you can get very narrow focused when you don't step outside of your comfort zone or your hometown. So yeah, thanks, Nichole. I think we do default faith-based Texas Christianity. That's what that means. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things you were touching on regarding what you were researching regarding abortion. So what is abortion, or what is your understanding of abortion? And I'll just add to this that not until the Dobbs decision and I started learning more about abortion did I realize that when you have a miscarriage, that's classified as an abortion medically. So it's like, oh, so like it's different than I thought it was. So tell us what you've discovered on your journey.
Yeah, for sure. So, the original abortion word is just a medical term, and it was basically just saying when the products of pregnancy prematurely exit the body, right? So it was just, only the doctor ran around kind of using this word per se. But then it's evolved. So there's like the non-medical version of the same word. So one word, two different meanings, represents the deliberate termination of a pregnancy. But then we also have the word miscarriage, which you mentioned, which is basically the non-deliberate abortion before 20 weeks. And then there's another word called stillborn if the child makes it to 20 weeks or past, and but yet it doesn't complete successful. So yeah, if you go in and if you were to have a miscarriage and you go in and to see the doctor, you may see the word abortion as the official medical condition that you were faced with. So yeah, that's kind of the background.
Mm-hmm. I think the terminology is really important to be mindful of, especially as we're having more bills passed that have words like abortion in them, and this move towards like criminalizing abortions. And it's like, well, what if a woman has a miscarriage and abortion is listed on her medical records? Is there a world where you're having a non-deliberate abortion that you could be criminalized? And this has happened in other countries. So I think it is an alarmist to start considering that as a path we could be on, and why we need to talk about this more and more, to be like, this is what some of the consequences are when we don't educate ourselves and get on the same page. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the history. Something I'm just interested in is, how do we get to where we are now? It seems like it was, at least my understanding, the rise of the religious right, where abortion became this almost singular voting issue for a lot of folks. And it's so polarizing. It comes down to, I feel like, a lot of people's decisions at the ballot box, at least in Texas. So can you zoom back a little bit and tell us some of the history?
Yeah, I've looked into this. I was very curious myself as well on how it all evolved. I mean, the first thing, I went kind of all the way back, and everywhere I read, prehistory, pre-Christianity, and as far as people have ever been recording stuff, there's been evidence of humans wanting to end pregnancies early on purpose, right? So, and they had all sorts of different ways to do it. Probably some of them worked better than others. And for sure, when Christianity was on the scene, these practices were happening at that time. I mean, everything I read said that they were. And then it really was, really the Catholic Church, and at least 100 years later, 200 years later, that they began thinking about this topic, and they knew that there was obviously not a lot about the reproductive cycle back then, but there was this, hey, I'm pregnant, but I don't see this moving baby in my belly yet. And then there's the moving baby part. So they called that the quickening. So there was the Catholic Church had this theory that at that time that the quickening is when the soul entered the body, right? Because they needed to think about when the soul entered, how that played out through the rest of the life cycle within the Catholic Church. And so this kind of went back and forth between debates inside of the Catholic Church on whether it was at the quickening or it was at conception that the soul entered the body. And then fast forward hundreds of years later, and I think I wrote down here 1869, so really not that long ago, is when the Catholic Pope decided that yes, indeed, the soul enters the body at the point in time of conception. And so that's where the Catholics were at that time. Now the Protestant side, Protestants and the Catholics didn't get along, right? If you guys remember, they had a few battles and wars between each other, and so in the U.S., of course, the Catholics were kind of looked at, kind of dismissed in a way, right? The Catholics are over there and the Protestants are over here, and we don't talk to each other. And it really wasn't and I guess the largest Protestant is the Southern Baptist, which really only picked up the abortion topic in 1973, very specifically, or 1970 to 73, very specifically around when Roe versus Wade came out. Their leadership said, hey, we think this abortion thing has merit, right? We should go borrow from the Catholic Church and sort of adopt the idea that the soul enters the body at the point in time of conception. And so that's really when the Southern Baptists started working on it. And then the evangelistic churches probably were about 10 years behind in picking up the same concept. So by the time we get to where we are now, obviously you see the evangelistic churches and the Catholic churches are the ones that have the belief system associated with, when the soul enters the body, and therefore when God believes life begins. Did I get your question, by the way? I remember I like read
Yeah.
all the way there.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. I'm just talking about the
Mhm.
history of it. Um, and it's interesting too. I mean, just thinking about how you said with this issue, it's like the, what's the history? And then there's the faith component and the legal component. I mean, it is very complicated when you start trying to try to, like, how do you even craft some sort of law that says this is permissible and this isn't? And I think towards the end of the conversation we'll talk about that, but we can mention it now. This idea of, like, how do you craft a law, a humane law about abortion? I mean, it's not easy. And something that I think about that's really helped me with my understanding of this is Slate podcast came out with a really great series, slow burn series, about Roe versus Wade. And they talk so much about the history, so much about the struggle that the Supreme Court justices went through trying to come up with a good compromise on abortion.
Mhm.
Specifically, I think Blackburn, what was his name? The one who wrote the opinion,
Mhm.
how he really wrestled with this and went back to the history to get his opinion. But it's just one of those things where it's not cut and dry, because it's also philosophical. Like, what is life? When does it start? When is it acceptable to terminate life? And those sorts of things.
Well, yeah, my connection on those two was again the Catholic Church. They have laws, right? So that's their law, right? They wrote them down, and it's not just abortion or everything. It's marriage and contraception and everything else that they kind of got into. And so when Roe versus Wade was coming down, my imagination was the Constitution said born, and then one argument was said, well, okay, but like if you wait till 33 weeks and they could be born, but they're not born, what about that? Right? So my view was it's a little bit about that Supreme Court saying, well, they have to be born, dadgummit, because that's the only what's in the Constitution. But then this idea that, well, when can you theoretically be born and be expected to live? And that's kind of where Roe versus Wade, the idea of viability, was the compromise. But it didn't really make the people that wanted to have a law that says contraception begins at, or life begins at contraception, to be the law, right? So they were still mad, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then the interesting thing is, how far do you take it? We talked about this in our initial questions that we sent out to you, but this idea of HOV lanes, is that what they're called? HOV lanes? What's that stand for?
High occupancy vehicle.
Thanks. I was like, human what is it? But the case that if you're pregnant, you're considered is that one person or two people? Where does it end? And what if we have a woman who comes to America who's an immigrant and she's pregnant? Is that child now a naturalized citizen? Are they a citizen before the baby's delivered? I mean, I don't know where it ends and how you draw that line.
Yeah, this is where it gets from. If you move past the faith-based concept and now you're trying to write down laws that everybody has to live by, you kind of have to shift your brain away from, okay, what does the world of faith say, to what does the word of law say, right? So what's our legal structure, right? And obviously the Constitution starts and then it works its way down to the state and everything else. But if you do this thought experiment that says, and again, this is what I've read, the strong anti-abortion people are trying to get to, is this idea that you are a citizen at the point in time of fertilization or conception. And they have a name for it. It's called fetal personhood. If you Google the language fetal personhood, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff out there. But it's basically, in some people's mind, they would like the Constitution to say fetal personhood's a real thing, and the state has a right to protect a citizen, the unborn child, from the moment in time that they're conceived through the rest of their life. And protection includes protecting that life from any old thing that could happen to it, including like something that its mother might decide for it to do, right? So this is kind of where it gets a little weird, because then you're like, are they on a census count? When the census come by, can you write an insurance policy on the person? So it's all kind of nonsensical from that perspective. You can't really treat an unborn person or unborn thing as a person legally because it doesn't work in the laws, right? So this is where the laws get all tripped up trying to like write laws for this around abortion, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing I'm thinking is as you're talking, the Catholic Church trying to decide when does the soul enter the body. And it's like we're all sort of assuming like, well, yeah, of course a soul enters the body, but does everyone believe that? Does everyone accept that that's, the way things are? Some people don't, and yet decisions are being made based on religion, and that's where I think that separation is important. And yet in Texas we see them instead of separating them, coming closer together. And a lot of people are getting sort of they're impacted in a way that they probably don't even believe to begin with. So that's another layer that just occurred to me. Yeah.
I think my brain is breaking. But I'm so glad we're having this conversation. So glad.
Yes. So where have you landed in your research? And I guess too, like what kind of word do you suggest we use? I mean, I think the one we default to is life, and even that is like, well, what is life almost? Is it personhood? Like what have you learned is kind of the right language or better language?
I think, well, I guess where my turning point in my journey is when I really started reading the Texas law, the House Bill 1280 Texas law, which again I'd read SB 8 as well. That's the Senate bill law, and that one had one funny thing in it around the heartbeat component. By the way, I'll do a quick sidebar on that one. The heartbeat, basically what happens is when your body is forming, the first thing that starts to work is the electrical impulses, right? So that's basically the pacemaker the cells that form the pacemaker is the thing that starts off. And that pacemaker is what the technology is able to pick up the electrical impulses and then convert them to a sound. So it's not an heartbeat from a fully formed heart that's making an actual analog sound, right? So it's a little bit of a misnomer in what they put in that one. But 1280 went further. I just talked about fetal personhood. Texas law is fetal personhood right now. It is legally on the books. Like if you go read House Bill 1280, there's legal definitions at the top. And basically they equate that every form of a person every form of a fetus or embryo as they go through the development cycle is equal to an unborn living child. And they do that legally because a little bit later on, they go get around to like setting up punishments and everything else for it, right? So you have to basically declare fetal personhood in order then to declare the protection for it. And so to me, I was like, this is a very sloppy law, right? It's very, very mean and very sloppy. And then as I kept reading the law, it got even weirder because, they had a punishment for a doctor that performed an abortion as a first degree felony, which if sexual assault in Texas is a second degree felony. So this hypothetical that sometimes I tell people is like, if for some reason a person was sexually assaulted and became pregnant and then got an abortion in Texas, and the doctor went to, basically got tried and the sexual assault got tried, the person with a sexual assault would get 20 years in prison. And the doctor that performed the abortion would get 99 years in prison. So just writing this and making this a law to me it's so bizarre that a group of human beings could write this. I guess they wrote it in a vacuum without many other people having input, because any normal group of people would struggle with it. So for me, this was the triggering mechanism that just said, we need to find a more balanced and workable law for our Texas citizens.
And so what does that look like? Because it sounds like you have something.
Well, if I was to write a law, the first thing that I tell people is we need to trust our women to make their decisions in all cases, right? So and so for me, I'm fine with the different groups providing inputs around what to do when you're dealing with the pregnancy and you're dealing with a very difficult situation. But ultimately, I think it's up to the female to decide what to do, and working with their support network and working with their medical network to make those decisions. Um, I think if you were to compromise on something, you would give something like 12 to 15 weeks of choice without any second opinion, and then anything after that under some sort of medical necessity or with the doctor's support should be okay. So to me, I think that would meet most people's needs, and still supports having as few abortions as possible, because it's a tough situation for people to be in, right? Don't want them to be there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just do a quick reminder that right now, the law in Texas is that you cannot get an abortion after 6 weeks. And there are not exceptions for rape or incest. There are some for if the life of the mother is threatened, but that's been really murky in the medical community. But for those of you who do not menstruate, it's hard to know that you're pregnant before 6 weeks. It's very difficult to catch. So that's
Scott,
why
it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, Claire.
Did I miss something?
Yeah. It's unfortunately it's 0 weeks. It's
tell
not
me
6
more
weeks.
about that.
It's 0 weeks. House Bill 1280. It's the same one that set the deal. There's the only way that you can have an abortion in Texas right now is if it's by a doctor, a medical professional, that and you have to be either have a risk of dying or losing a major bodily function. Is the only exception. And they go into a big, it's like the way it's written is weird, but they go to a big paragraph that says, hey, if you are basically a suicide risk, if you don't let me do this, then I'm going to kill myself, blah, 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 blah. And they specifically call that out and say not included as a reason to get the abortion, right? Because they're like, oh, a loophole. Everybody will use that loophole, right? So just like if you're a 12-year-old child, no, right? Rape, incest, no. Mental health issues. I have a one story I'll quickly share. A lady operates at about a 8th or 10th grade level, but she's 22 years old, and she had a friend and she got pregnant, right? And so the mother's like, she can't raise a child, right? So no mental health exceptions. So that's what the law is right now. So basically, women are leaving.
Yeah, no, even I was incorrect. So thank you for setting that straight. It's also confusing because other states it's now that Roe has fallen, it's falling to other states. So other states have different laws. So I might be confusing us with a different state.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's a lot. It's just a patchwork system at the moment. And it's not good if you are in a bad situation and you need to access an abortion because you can't.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for fixing that for me. So I'm curious, why do you think that we see so much political capital spent on legislating abortion and yet not as much, at least it feels like, on actually helping these families once these children come?
Yeah, I think it's just obviously on the political side, it triggers voters, right? There's a large voting bloc that will vote for it. I think the historical Republican position is on the backside, helping the families. Obviously, they'll attribute that or can attribute that to like a welfare concept, right? So so there's like a desire in the Republican Party not to give out government money to people, right? Encourage them to get out and work and do things like that. So I think it's competing within themselves is the problem there. So you don't quite see the support network on the backside, but you'd think it'd be very easy to create a huge incentive for someone to keep a child by providing, let's say, a year of paid medical leave and support structure, and especially for women and families that need additional help, right? You would think that would be a great approach, but we just don't see it in the laws. So
Yeah, this is actually, I've mentioned this before in the show, but I read this really great book not that long ago called The Girls Who Went Away. And this was a book that chronicled women. This was before Roe, before women could get an abortion in America, who became pregnant, young women, teens, early 20s, and they were unsure what to do with their pregnancy. And many of the times, they were sent away to these homes where they would carry out their pregnancy to term, and then their children would be adopted out. And they were told by their families, by the people running these homes, you're going to forget about this. You're going to go on. You're going to have your own family and everything will be fine. Well, it wasn't fine, not a surprise. But a lot of these women took this path because they were in a really poor financial situation, or their families just didn't want them to have children. But generally it was that they knew, I don't have the, like, maybe I want this baby, but I don't have the means to take care of this baby. So what are my options? And sadly, there's no great option is really, I think, what we're saying here. But again, it's like, without that, it's tough when you get pregnant sometimes. I mean, it's tough getting pregnant.
Yeah. Well, I'm only an observer, but one thing, I'll give you one data point to kind of add to that thought process, because I think it is helpful. 60% of women who seek an abortion already have a child. Whereas most like common thought processes, you're always thinking of, the young person that gets themselves in trouble, right? But 60%, so the mothers already know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to try to match reality with the perception, I think, that we have. And that is such a good point, because I would say that the other, I feel like, common perception is that it is sort of single, reckless people who are just sort of not being careful and looking for an easy way out. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really great that you were bringing that up. It's a really, there's a lot of disconnect there.
Oh yeah. I did some math where I just like counted all the people that connected with each other, and like just normal failure rate of different types of contraceptive uses. You're already going to get a big population with normal, perfect contraceptive uses. You're still going to get a big population of unwanted pregnancy. In fact, my calculation said we should have about 120,000 in Texas per year based upon my math, and we were looking at 55,000 last time they were counting them. So it's going to happen, right? It's just part of our existence on the planet. So
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up this conversation, we talked about this a little bit regarding Texas Right to Life, the PAC. But tell us a little bit about how Christian nationalism plays into this specific topic.
Yeah, Christian nationalism was obviously abortion and Christian nationalism are highly connected. So obviously to make, well, the obvious thing is if you have a faith-based belief system that the soul enters the body at point in time of conception, I'm going to say that word right, then of course you're going to be comfortable with laws that follow that belief system, right? So Christian nationalism, in their desire to like connect the dots, they need people to believe that. To believe that, you need to be going, especially young people, you need to be going to certain schools. To go to those schools, you need to have things like vouchers and charter schools and other things to basically make those schools attractive, so you can basically teach these things. So it's all intertwined in the basic belief systems that we have. So yeah, they are behind. My belief is that movement and the money behind it is what's behind everything. Do you guys ever drive up and down 35 East and see all what I call the baby boards?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I haven't.
You haven't? Okay,
No,
well,
but
if you drive to Dallas and drive back, it's all on 35.
I'm lying. I just drove to Dallas. You're exactly right. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. So every time I drive past them, and I used to be like, oh, these people really care about babies here in middle of nowhere. And later on, I'm like, you know what? Tim Dunn funded all of these, all of these billboards, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm being manipulated now, right? So that's what I see when I run down that highway now versus empathy for the people that are, the locals that are basically supposedly putting them up there. I don't believe it's true. I think it's done outside of those communities. So
Yeah. And for people who don't know what we're talking about, gosh, I can't believe I didn't remember this. So it's usually a picture of a really adorable little baby face or a baby in a blanket, and it'll say, something really sort of innocent with air quotes, like, my life began at conception or something like that. Or,
Yep.
They're meant to tug at the heartstrings. That's for sure.
Yeah. Very sophisticated advertising, very emotive advertising, right? So.
But also, it's funny you say sophisticated, but with a sheen of like sort of amateurishness look about them. But yes,
so sophisticated they look amateurish. Yes,
looks like somebody could have,
what it is.
Sat at home and built it themselves. But yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I don't like that, and I think you even shared a little bit of that with us in your sort of pre-answers to our questions about how you were frustrated that you felt like you were misled. Is that right? Okay.
For me personally, the as I went through this again, I kind of I think I voted Republican. I didn't vote for Donald Trump because he assaulted my senses, but I voted Republican for everybody else pretty much ever since then. Even all the locals, state governments and stuff. But when I kind of really understood the connection of the Christian nationalist people and how it was really a small number of people that were using a lot of very sophisticated techniques to decide and in essence own the Republican Party, right, through everything that they do in the just the process of doing it. I switched, right, and I told my dad and others who said, "Hey, you're a Democrat now." I'm like, well, it's not that I'm not a Republican. The Republican Party left me, right? And so I voted all Democrat last November for the first time in my life, and I think the only way to kind of it'd be nice to have Democrats and Republicans kind of fighting for the goodness of the middle ground again, which is not where we are right now in Texas, in my view. Hopefully we can get back there someday, and I'm going to try to do that, because obviously if Republicans start losing some offices, they'll soften their opinions on some of these ideas. So that's where I am, and that's where I'll stay until something changes. So.
Yeah. I keep thinking about how you attending this one event that your daughter was a part of just led you down this really unique journey. How has it been with the two of you now talking about this?
She enjoys. She's moved on to other things now, but she is. We like to talk politics every now and then. It gets her excited. So she's getting a social work degree from UT. So she's all into these topics. So she's very happy that I'm doing these things, I believe. So. But but I think all three of my daughters are very supportive. So
yeah. Oh, I love just this idea of children being able to help teach their parents something new. Because I don't know, sometimes I feel like there's this resistance, like, no, I'm the parent, and like it's hard for parents to get outside of that mindset, right? And be like, actually, there's things my kids can teach me. And I'm at the beginning of this with a 2 and 5-year-old, but I'm excited for where they'll take me one day.
They will teach you to listen and talk less over time.
That's true. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and I think about the evolution of our relationship, and yes, it is drastically different, but super amazing, yeah. For sure. I have been forced to learn things that I may not have otherwise, and I am so grateful.
Yeah. It's amazing. So let's end on a positive note. What is giving you hope?
Well, what's giving me hope? I think there's kind of two things. I think there's a opportunity for better male contraception that's coming along medically. So I think if that comes in play, the less instances that people are dealing with this situation will go down. There'll always be some. But the other thing that gives me hope and is that there's a paradigm shift in the world of abortion, and that's through the Plan C pills, I guess. And listening to some stories that happened in Latin America and Mexico, I realized that the experience of going through a procedure with the pills is like night and day from the procedure of going to a clinic physically. And I think it's just so much easier on women to go through that and their families, and they can do it basically privately. So I think what is going to happen, or what I'm pretty sure is happening, is access to these pills is allowing everybody that needs to take a step to take it really with a lot of help, and so their lives are not really being as damaged as I perceive that they might be damaged by these laws. So basically that gives me hope that I think the people's real problems may not be as bad as they look like on paper. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was so funny when you shared your answers with us and you said male contraception, and I was like, oh yeah, like I think we just assume, and because this is how it's kind of been, that it's a responsibility of women to
right
to carry that torch, and it's like, no, like medical technology figured out a way, and it could for male contraception, and hopefully, yeah, we'll see some money and research put that direction, because we're probably going to need it in America sooner than later.
Exactly.
Well, just that mindset shift, right, is something that is clearly needed, that this is a mutual responsibility. So
yes,
if for no other reason than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been reading that in Texas that requests for vasectomies have been going through the roof. Kind of what you're speaking to. Men are realizing that they need to be a part of this as well, and that's one way that they're being a part of that family planning process.
Yeah, I've read that too. I think people with these laws in place, right? Unless you're really kept from the information flow. And again, we have communities that are purposely kept from information flow, as both of you know. But if you're pretty well communicated with, male and female, you're working hard to avoid the situation more than ever right now. So there's an unintended consequences of the laws, right? So you're trying best you can to not get there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any last thoughts, Nichole, before we move on to our attention mentions?
I don't have any. I'm just so grateful for this conversation. I think, I have to admit, Scott, that probably for sure when we were planning this out, I don't think either of us imagined that we would speak to a man about abortion.
Yeah. Once again, we're like, oh man.
How smart of you.
but it's so great.
Your instincts are excellent.
And yet, like I'm so grateful that we are having this conversation, because as we were just talking about the importance of this being a mutual, conversation that everybody's willing to engage in and have is absolutely important, and the only way that we're going to see what we want reflected in our politics. So I think it's so great.
Yes, agree. That was great. Okay, well, let's move to our attention mentions, where we mention something that has our attention. Yeah. Are y'all ready? I got to think for a second. So who's got one?
Oh, I'm prepped because, I listen to your podcast, and so I knew I was going to need one of these guys, so you're not able to surprise me like your other guests. So
smart.
Yeah, but I have one. I guess I have two real quick. There's a book I'm reading called The Art of More by Michael Brooks. It's the history of math. And math actually is what changed civilization and created travel, and it created accounting, and it created everything that we have today. So definitely it's like amazing spin on things. And because the reason why it's called The Art of More is because people can't naturally count past 3 unless you take some math classes.
Oh, interesting.
Nice. All right. Mondays are my library day, so I'm going to see if I can find that. How about you, Nick? And what's your second one?
Second, yeah.
Oh, second one. We watched the movie Amsterdam the other day, which is It's all fictional, except it's based on the true story. Apparently, there was a Brigadier General Smiley Butler back in the 1930s, who there was a whole plot of businessmen that tried to get him to step in as a dictator of the United States, like Mussolini, because they were copying Mussolini. And he basically he was like the leader of the the veterans at the time. And he basically said no, and he went to Congress and he gave a big speech about how there was this big plot to overthrow the government, and he stopped it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had not heard that story.
Awesome. Okay, Nichole, what do you have?
It's one that I'm actually like, is this what I want to share? I just watched this show. There's only 2 episodes out, called Will Trent. Apparently it's an ABC show. I watch it on Hulu. And it's this detective who's dyslexic and reads crime scenes really well. And he's very Southern. It takes place in Georgia and Atlanta. And there's only 2 episodes out, but I will admit I was super drawn in. I'm curious to see if I still continue to be drawn in, but Will Trent it's an ABC show.
All right. So my attention mention, I already mentioned it in this show, but I'll mention it again. I would really encourage folks who want to learn more about abortion to listen to Slate's Slow Burn podcast, specifically the Roe v. Wade series that they did. It was just fascinating. They talked so much about the history, about all the work that went into the Roe versus Wade opinion, and it was just really, it was so well done. So I would steer folks that direction. And one more thing, Scott, tell us what you recommend people follow to learn more about this.
Well, I have one that that just kind of really changed my mindset, and it was one of the New York Times ones, but it's basically called The Mexican Model of Abortion Rights. And I highly recommend anybody to listen to this one. It's part of the Daily, which is the New York Times famous podcast. But it explains how like Mexico and Latin America went about it completely different and have been quite successful with it. So
nice. All right. So we got lots of content for our listeners to go forth with and educate
And if they
themselves.
follow you, what will they see there?
Oh, well, if they follow me, like I got right now, you'll see all my old videos, which are definitely worth watching if you want to go through a lot of content. And they're pretty short. Most of them are like 5 minutes long or something. But I haven't posted a lot since the election because I was so kind of taken back by how little abortion moved the Texas needle. Now it's different on the national needle. So in my mind, I realized that what I was doing was interesting for myself, but I wasn't sure it was actually making a difference, really, right? So I've been kind of pausing and rethinking some other threads on how to come back at it again. But if you go out, look at my Instagram, you'll see those videos. I enjoyed putting them there, and a lot of people have said they like them. So,
yeah. And we'll definitely put a link in the episode description. But it is Let's Talk About Abortion in TX.
That's
right?
correct.
That's the handle.
Okay. No spaces. My kids made me take the spaces out. So,
so smart. Well, we appreciate the work that you've done and the videos you've put up there. I found them very helpful. So, thank you again for your time and for sharing. For sharing your journey with us and where you've landed on this important topic. Because I think sometimes it's nice just to know how someone else has found their path and to know that we're all figuring things out as we go and hopefully working towards bettering the lives of Texans in the end.
I totally agree. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. So.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me, Nichole Abshire, and my co-host, Claire Campos O'Neill, on Go Behind the Ballot. Hopefully, we've demystified some little portion of Texas politics, and we hope that you'll do more with us. Check out our website at www.gobehindtheballot.com, where you'll find links to all of our social media, and you will find our community. Let's join together and do more. We hope you'll let us know what is working, and we hope you'll join us next week. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one.